Pervasive Media Studio Lunchtime Talk. These talks are live every Friday at 1 p.m. and are beaming out onto smartphones, laptops, iPads, and living room TVs as we speak. We're also broadcasting live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, so you've got your pick of channels to watch on. With the latest government restrictions, we're moving these talks back online only for the next few weeks, and we're already looking forward to welcoming back into the space soon when it's safe for us to do so. I'm Luke Emery. I'm the Pervasive Media Studio producer. I'm a white man with a large ginger beard and short dark hair, and I'm wearing a green t-shirt with a pink print on it that says Deaf Heaven. These talks are our chance to throw open the digital doors this week of the Pervasive Media Studio and view progress which are in need of feedback, questions, and curious minds. And especially big welcome to anyone out there who's watching who's new to what we do. Here's a little bit more about us. The studio is a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology with everything from comedy to coding and product development to performance art. We're a partnership between the Watershed, the University of the West of England, and the University of Bristol, and we're a home for embryonic ideas, research and development of new things and buildings of new companies. And we're a meeting place of both creative and commercial industries. We offer studio space, desk space, meeting rooms, events, and opportunities to all of our residents. And ultimately, we're a space for people and companies to take risks in their practice and make time for collaboration. A captioned and recorded version of the talk will be available here after the talk is finished. And there's a Q&A at the end of the talk, as there is every week. If you want to ask a question, leave a comment or give us some feedback, pop it in the chat or up, and we'll ask the speaker at that point. You can get news on all our future talks by heading to watershed.co.uk/studio, following us on @PMStudioUK on Twitter or @Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram, or by subscribing to this YouTube channel, or even by subscribing to our newsletter on the website. Now, I'd like to introduce today's talk. In this lunchtime talk, Artistic Director Stephanie Kempson reflects on the online productions her company, Sharp Teeth Theatre, created over the pandemic and the lessons she's learned from trying to keep some theatre digital. It couldn't be better timed, given the fact that there are new restrictions on what we then can't do under COVID. So I would like you all to please give a warm digital welcome to Stephanie.
Hiya. Thanks for having me, Luke. I'm Steph. I am a white woman with blonde, long hair. I'm wearing a black polo neck and I'm in a spare room. I am the artistic director of Sharp Teeth Theatre, a company that I've been running in Bristol for a little while now, and director, writer and dramaturg with a chronic illness. So that informs some of my work as well. And I've been a resident at the PM studio for a while now and love it. Suck up over. So I just wanted to come to here today to do a love letter to Zoom Theatre, because Zoom Theatre has kind of been a thing that has helped my company stay afloat and grow through this time, and has really changed my perspective on digital theatre and what theatre can be in an online space and how it can be made accessible to audiences in a very different way, whether that's accessible in terms of disability, where people have energy impairments and they can't leave their house, or whether people have childcare or they're carers, or whether they're just geographically far away from a theatre, so it's a lot harder for them to come. Digital theatre has some really exciting possibilities, basically, and I really want it to continue. As someone who's sometimes housebound, I would love for digital theatre to just very much continue beyond COVID, which would be great. So I wanted to, let me just get my clicker up so I can change the screen. Okay, so switch on to the next slide. Oh, Jack, could you switch me on to the next slide? Thank you. Great. Amazing. So these are the 4 productions that we've done online. So my company had never done any digital work before. As an artist, I've worked on shows that have been technology driven, site specific or promenade, as well as more traditional theatre work and podcasts and lots of different mediums as a dramaturg. A lot of my experience as a director doing kind of site specific and promenade work, which has informed this show quite a lot, was working for Bristol Vic and the SS Great Britain on their Halloween production, Spooky Ship, which was kind of my biggest show as kind of lead artist, generally every year. So I was working at a much smaller scale before this production happened. And I've also done work with Compass Presents, who are another resident at the studio doing amazing work. And they did a show called House Party on Henley Street for Shakespeare-specific Promenade, but they haven't really been infused with that much technology. So coming into the pandemic, I was a new learning experience. We were coming from a place, a company of not having a lot of technological resources, and doing a lot of learning job. And so this form has been a really exciting adventure for us. We made three productions before, in kind of the last period of lockdown. So Sherlock In Homes 1, Murder at the Circus, which is the picture on the left there. That was our first show. We took a punt on that in August 2020, and that was largely because all of us just weren't able to find performing or theatre making work. And I had tried to retrain a little bit and realised that I just didn't want to, but the disabled community online were really focused on the fact that actually for those of us who had disabilities that were affecting whether we could go out, and because I was shielding effectively because I'm immunocompromised, basically had to try and find a way to make work things from home, because I wasn't able to go back into theatre, I wasn't able to go back into workshops for a really long time, and I still wanted to be making work. So it was born out of necessity, this project, and luckily I happened to both of those. Director, who do Murder She Didn't Write, which is a very popular show of improvised murder mysteries. They are absolutely amazing at their job. And also opera at the Wardrobe Theatre, another kind of wealth of brilliant improvisers, as well as lots of other improv going on in Bristol. So thankfully I had a lot of improvisers and kind of willing collaborators, and we took a punt on the first show without funding. One of our artists, Peter Baker, he is a murder mystery nut and had worked for the Agatha Christie estate in a previous life, and had also written murder mysteries previously. So we approached him, and he's stayed writing our 3 murder mysteries throughout this time. So happened to have this like connection to these people, which was just really perfect. So I brought together lots of people that have worked on Sharp Teeth projects before, and a few other people, and we made the show. And it opened in September, and it was really slow sales at first. It's quite nerve-wracking knowing that we'd taken a risk on that and put a lot of kind of our time and resources into it. But it got such good word of mouth, and we held out. And by October, because of the situation that was going on with the second lockdown coming in, we effectively started selling out. And we were then able to get support from the Wardrobe Theatre and some more support from Bristol Vic, who were really keen to support us, because they were really keen on kind of finding ways to put their CRF funding into projects that were supporting freelancers, with an awareness that the freelancers were kind of having a really tough time, particularly in the fact that some freelancers weren't served by the government's self-employment income support scheme. So anyone that had time in the last year due to illness or care responsibilities or childcare minimalised by the self-employment income support scheme by the government. So for us, this was something that was also kind of like making sure that we were being really positive in our in hiring people and giving people work. So last year, Sherlock In Homes, it started selling out. We started touring to lots of places with the first Sherlock In Homes. We had audiences from all over the world. So mainly we were marketing it to people in the UK, but over our first 3 shows, Sherlock In Homes 1, 2, and they were from Brazil, Norway, Belgium, the USA, France, Singapore, China, Australia, Senegal. So we had pretty much people from Arctic, but I assume the internet's not that good there. Otherwise, I'd be more offended by their not attending. Go and sit in a Zoom room and go, oh no, we're doing this. Oh, how's your lockdown? And instead just have a moment of kind of like collaborative escapism, and it ended up being kind of our most successful year as a company ever. And we joined forces with the Wardrobe Theatre to kind of like make it sustainable for us as a company. They helped us get Arts Council funding for Sherlock In Homes 2, Murder on Ice, that opened in February. And they also supported us when we made Streaming Beauty, which was our kind of interactive Christmas panto that was very different for Sherlock In Homes, which we made with Tom Marshman in December 2020. So we made a lot of work last year. I don't usually spend a lot of time working for my own company. It's something that kind of pops up throughout my year, maybe once or twice. But last year, my company became kind of like the main focus of my work in order to kind of like promote this work and make this work. It was just a really exciting thing to suddenly have all our work going out to all these people and having this phenomenal response. And although we really struggled to meet audiences initially, because during COVID, the system of marketing that are kind of our knowledge of theatre and digital theatre in particular, which doesn't yet have a huge kind of like network, we struggled with that initially, and it was only kind of through the partnerships that we made that we managed to get reviewers in and get our kind of 4-star review from the stage, and start to kind of really make a name for ourselves and attract audiences. But we also were employing, I think we've probably employed about 30 people, maybe more, over the past year, which is, and for quite long periods of time. Sherlock In Homes 1 ran from September through till May 2021, which is like the longest running show I've ever worked on as a lead artist. So yeah, it was a really surprising hit. And Sherlock In Homes 2 opened to kind of like sold out audiences and ran until the end of May as well, when we kind of saw a natural fall off of audiences just because it was summer and everyone wanted to see their family. And then this winter we have got Arts Council funding again, and again partnered with the Wardrobe Theatre, and we are making our third, well, we've made and now have up our third Sherlock In Homes, which is Murder at the Games. And all of them kind of been set in different eras. So the first one was in 1899, the second one in 1929, the third one in 1960, which is like slightly annoying because it's 1 year later than you'd hope for like neatness. Yeah, so my background in working in technological work has kind of come from the Pervasive Media Studio. So my first job in theatre that I got through Mayfest in Bristol was as an intern with a company called Mercurial Wrestler on a show called Magna Mysteria, which was an amazing technology-driven kind of citywide 10-day production of this search for this character with lots of different interactive elements, people being contacted on phones and things like that. And all of that experience that I gained from being a communications person on that, I then became their communications manager later when they went on tour, has all informed the way that I approached Zoom in order to use it. Obviously, as a company, as I said, we didn't have a lot of technological resources. So our first show was very lo-fi, and it was all about finding the best way to run it lo-fi so it was reliable, and also just really gave focus to the thing that gave the show the magic, which was the story and the performers, which was our real focus for that, rather than it kind of being a massive technological thing, because we just didn't have the resources to do that at the time. But over time, we've slowly built our process and worked with different people and made a lot of learning, which I'm going to cover a little bit today. Yeah, so let me see. Let's change the next slide. Okay. Oh, sorry, Jack. Would you be able to click it again? My clicker has decided it doesn't want to work. Ah, great. Excellent. Oh, back one. So there we are. So I just wanted to, I feel like I'm trying to click and Jack's trying to click, and we're having a hilarious to and from. Thanks, Jack. So I just wanted to kind of look at some of the things that we really considered when we were approaching digital theatre that allowed us to kind of get the most that we could out of the format and out of Zoom for us. So these things were kind of terms that have been floating around that we've kind of tried to reconsider in our in our practice. So thinking about the work site specifically, like generally your audience will always be attending from their homes, because that's where they know their internet, that's where they know their space. So in our work, something that needs bandwidth, because Zoom takes up a lot of bandwidth, it generally people will be working from home. So in all our work, there's kind of this consideration that we need to be engaged with the fact that our audience is at home and that they might have different distractions calling from their attention. So it's kind of like always thinking about the work as located for them in their houses in quite an interesting way. We also kind of looked at the term interactive. So Zoom is very much a conferencing tool. That is what it's for. Like the image quality isn't always the highest because it's trying to manage so many different feeds at once. The sound isn't always the clearest. It's often kind of like prioritizing one sound over another thing. But it was very much like, so Zoom is built for interactions, and that's what our show had to be about. And murder mystery is a brilliant thing to use because people they inherently know what the aim of a murder mystery is, and it's a form that people just understand, whether they've played a murder mystery party game or whether they just watch murder mysteries on TV. People know how an interview works. It's something that is very built into our culture. So it was a kind of loved and simple approach to like introduce an interactive element to an audience who might only be coming because there's less choice, but they may never have done any interactive work before. And because our show relies on the audience understanding rules and feeling comfortable, this was a really good format for us to kind of pitch to people. So our show is all about giving space to people to ask questions to the actors within the world, grasp their motives and share theories and ask questions between character, kind of still interacting with people but mainly holding the space. And then we've got the interview rooms where the interviews take place, where everyone switches to gallery view and the actor is kind of like in amongst all the audience members, and the audience become very much like part of the show for everyone watching. And the main thing was just our actors getting really used to how they use Zoom, how they hold a room, and it becomes surprisingly second nature quite quickly. I'm sure everybody has a lot of like hilarious Zoom stories of like people all trying to speak at once. But if you've got someone who's responsible for holding a room, and you've got a community of people across the world who are becoming so Zoom literate, it was a very useful, easy tool to use for interactive work and to set up a kind of like understood system with our audience. The next time we kind of looked at is immersive, and I'm not talking about immersive theatre necessarily, because that feels like a not a digital environment, like a live environment that you can wander around in, like a Punch Drunk show or Invisible Circus, or and I'm talking more about immersive in kind of like the term that is being bandied about for marketing. So there's a lot of like displeasure sometimes in the way that the word immersive is used in marketing copy, because it is sometimes used a bit too loosely, but it's rather, we might not say that our show is immersive, but our aim as a company is to immerse people in the world, in the game of it, in the story and the characters. So we're very much trying to immerse people. We wouldn't call it immersive work, but our aim is to pull people into the screen and connect them in with the other people in the room and connect them in with the characters in the world. So the word immersive was still really important to us. I also tried to coin a new term called like electric promenade, which was a terrible idea by someone, that it was a terrible term. I think it was just me trying to be cool. But it's just to basically, this work for me has got a lot of similarity to promenade, just because you've got groups of audiences moving around. Though actually in ours, kind of the actors are generally moving to the audience in different rooms. So they're not physically moving because they're staying where they are in the show, that they move from an office where they're briefed into the different suspects' rooms where they'll interview them. So there is a sense of promenade, and there's also a sense of kind of multiple pathways with different things go. The challenge obviously in like real life promenade is kind of like how you get your audience to different spaces while holding the kind of the dramaturgy and the story and the tension of the piece, like not letting people kind of like lose the story. Whereas in our show, the kind of benefit is the audience aren't massively moving, they're staying in one room and the audience move to them. So, and the way that we generally finish our interview suspect scenes kind of leaves our audience wanting to discuss, to reflect on what's just happened and to plan for their next interview, because they know that there's a time, there's a kind of cut-off time that they will get with each of these actors. The other term that I found really useful is the idea of multiple middles. So that's a gaming terminology thing of like this idea of, I've forgotten the lady, have a check in the middle of the show that kind of brings everyone together again, and then a finale scene at the end. But essentially our 5 teams in each show experience a totally different order of events, and so there is very much a multiple middles, as well as the fact that the audience is that actually every audience will have a different experience in each room, because they will approach things with different biases, with different questions, with different pressures, which will kind of take the story in a different way, but at the same time it's kind of held together by the actors and by the beginning, middle and end. So it's very much like this idea of this like rich multiple middles that come together into these scenes that hold it together in the beginning, middle and end. And gaming terminology is stuff that I've learned a lot more about since. I played a lot of games as a teenager, but then have not played any since. Theatre became my obsession, and now I feel like I'm returning to some of that and learning a lot more about kind of gaming theory, which has been really useful in kind of making playable theatre. The next final term that I wanted to talk about is obviously the nature of the work being cinematic. Despite the fact that Zoom doesn't necessarily have such a high resolution, there's still a lot you can do with a camera angle. And obviously we are generally working with a fixed point camera, but it's kind of about your actors learning an awareness of how they are framing themselves, how they're moving in the space, whether they're doing a close-up or an extreme close-up, and kind of playing around with that. So we worked a lot in our kind of rehearsals with our actors being like, how do you tell a secret physically? How do you show conflict or dislike? How do you show that you're lying when you're only in a tiny box on someone's screen? Like how best to get those messages across. And we found ourselves kind of like that really heightening the way that we do our characters. So our characters very much based on kind of like the real kind of stories of life, and like you can connect, they are all kind of larger than life. And that larger than lifeness in the way that we use the camera kind of translated across a lot into the kind of characters that Peter created for us, which were these often quite pun named characters that were quite ridiculous. Like one of our recent characters is called Brad Minton. We had another one called Captain Albatross. On Your Marks is a Russian runner. Wonder Gold is a US runner. So lots of like very punny, larger than life names kind of influence that. It all designed so that people can get the idea about a character from the information that's been given, and also from the way, and that's all coming a lot from how we played it with the camera work. So our first show is very much based at the circus of the Sherlock In Homes ones, and we had very simple designed by one of our actors who did a brilliant job. It felt like everyone was in the same space, and we got a lot of questions from people about whether we were all in the same building, but it didn't really think about location. In our second show, we got a lot more money, and we really started to play around with kind of like the cinematography of it. We had like different locations for different scenes. So the first and the end scene and the middle scene always felt like they were in the captain's cabin on this Argentinian naval ship that had pulled up in Antarctica ready to investigate a murder on this base. And then all the interviews happened in this kind of like claustrophobic wooden base, with each of the characters in kind of the space that they felt most naturally in, whether that was the kitchen, the science lab, hidden in like underneath the floorboards, in a dog shed, or in their bedroom. Angles kind of really bringing this sense of like claustrophobia, and bringing this sense of like the status of a character, which was very fun to play with. And that kind of the cinematography of that, we also used like sepia filters, and the idea was kind of like that when our actors appeared on screen, our audience needed to immediately recognize that they were in the show and not an audience member who just appeared. So there was kind of like always something signature that kind of held their shots together. In our third show, we've played a lot more with green screens. So we have one kind of green screen space, and then a bedroom space that belongs to the athletes in the Olympic Village. And that was very much, we've pulled from more of a Wes Anderson vibe, with lots of kind of strong colours and wallpapers. And that's been a really beautiful, that's been done by kind of Kat Fuller, our designer, and Chloe Masheter, who's our technological director. And she's been brilliant at kind of like making sure our green screens worked, because in our second show, I'm jumping forward a bit, but our second show, we didn't have someone who had a huge amount of experience with green screen. And so we're making a lot of mistakes that just meant that the green screens just didn't want to work for us, basically. And it meant that over that time, we've been able to find people that have that knowledge and that can kind of bring that in from their experience of the gaming world effectively to help us out. But the cinematography has kind of remained really important. I think I'm just going to show you a video now of our kind of Meet the Suspects video and our trailer for our second show. So I think we're just going to watch that now.
Hello and welcome to Little Norway, a small European village on the bottom of the world. Down here we're 4,000 miles from civilization. So why would anyone spend an entire 2 years? It's all thanks to this man, Admiral Albert Ross. This is his second expedition to the Antarctic, but he's not here on holiday, no. He's pushing forward the frontiers of human exploration. He and his intrepid crew arrived in November 28 to build their base camp, complete with radio tower, living quarters, and scientific facilities. The majority of the expedition then left for home, leaving only a skeleton crew to suffer through the harsh winter months. Here's the pride of Wales, Dr. Penelope Gwynn, the expedition's zoologist, in her laboratory. And of course, they need to know where they are. Here's Norwegian cartographer Get Your Bearings, keeping everyone in the loop. What's this? A Girl Scout at the South Pole? Why, yes. Australian B5 Huskies, bully for her. And finally, here's the lady who won Admiral Ross's heart, Bella de Ball. The Admiral's new wife has decided to spend the winter months with him. Now that's an unusual honeymoon. But she makes the best of it and is preparing to host the weekly talent show. These five, and the rest of the crew, may...
Detectives, we interrupt this broadcast with terrible news. Admiral Albert Ross has been found dead. Detectives, we need your help.
What kind of people are you?
So is it possible that...
One of them could be.
Yeah, so that is our kind of like longer trailer that kind of gives people a hint of what to expect from the show and introduces the Meet the Suspects. So the Meet the Suspects video is something that we try and get done and send out with our case files, and that information is all kind of part of our setup for the show. And we kind of have designed these murder mysteries in a way that we want them to be something that people can absorb the information for quickly. I'm not always the fastest at absorbing information, so I kind of use myself as a bit of a guide for how fast information can be picked up. I'm not naturally really, really talented at murder mysteries, so I think that was quite a useful thing to have me, unlike Peter, our writer on the cast, have me in the show absorbing that. But we designed our murder mysteries to be very easy to get into. Everyone should relationship to each other and the story overarching it. And even if they're asking the wrong questions, they're kind of key things that the actors have to get out in each room, because those key things will help them unlock the story in other rooms and kind of provide a gateway into the experience. And we always tap in the middle that kind of makes sure that some of the key kind of grounding facts still remain in the front of people's heads. And we also kind of like, but not also, but it's always just a little bit more complicated than you'd expect. So there's always some kind of twist. So it's quite easy for a large group to kind of like work together and get most of the way, but it always takes a couple of extra steps to kind of like work out the twist and who the murderer is. And that's kind of the good thing about our show, is that it's accessible, you get invested in it, but at the same time it is a little bit harder than you'd expect to solve. And it takes a group kind of like listening and working together and really like paying attention to the details and attention to the motive of the actors and reading their body language to kind of like just push it that bit farther to work out who it is. And which makes our murder mysteries kind of like enjoyable but tantalizingly a little bit tough. So anyway, to go back to kind of the process of it, so we've got our pre-show info that we send out that kind of like starts to prime our detectives and help them understand their role. So I was just going to show you actually our case files. Let's see if my clicker's working. So yeah, if you could click me on, Jack, that'd be great. So we've got our case files. We've got our front page, which kind of has some key pictures that kind of relate to some of the aspects of the murder. We've got there was another page with a note that kind of like says, "Dear detectives," and invite them. And then there's this page with some news clippings, which kind of help people understand where they are in the time period, because obviously we're taking people to a time period that they might not necessarily know. So we've just come back to the page, and that's got a note from Sir Stanley Shartington, which is kind of our very silly inspector character that kind of brings people in. We have a suspects page with lots of the names and kind of basic reminders of who the characters are, with an idea that maybe the audience will print the suspects page out. And the next page that's really useful for them is a map of the space, which is our final section of the case files. And that is kind of like gives the audience a grounding in the space so that they can understand the geography of it. We always give these information again to audiences, but it's useful for audiences to kind of have this information before, so they can start to absorb the basics of the mystery so they don't feel overwhelmed. And obviously not everyone will look at that, not everyone will print it out, but there'll hopefully be a keener amongst the group that will kind of like drive that a bit further. So just to jump back on the slides to the page where it kind of explains what's going on, we've got our, let's have a look. Yeah, there we are. So we've got our pre-show info that comes out. Then we call everyone, setting up the kind of like the banterous nature of the show in the first introduction and kind of starting to warm the crowd up. Then we've got our introduction, which has got kind of divided into 5 elements of kind of like placing them like in the context, which in this recent one is kind of the Rome Olympics 1960, the Cold War, the first ever televised Olympics, and kind of the beginning of the civil rights movement. The suspects are introduced again and kind of in a bit more detail. We remind people of how the show works, which is something that we have repeatedly in our information, just so people know how the shape of the show is going to be, because sometimes people just don't have time to look at it till they get to the show. And then finally, the most important information, which is kind of the facts of the murder. And we support that by putting stuff in the chat so that people have that, and our technician is and to kind of like provide information. And we've since our most recent show, we've been using OBS to do a lot of kind of show work, so it looks like we've got a slide projector also being shown that's kind of giving pictures alongside it, so we're kind of supporting people that are different types of learners, whether they are oral learners or readers, or they work best from kind of pictures. So hopefully we can support all different types of learners to know what is going on, because we want people to feel on an even footing for our murder mystery. The audience then split up into these 5 groups, and they meet the 5 suspects for 5 minutes each. We have a really fun time with kind of entrance and exits, and Tagatino, who's the name of our technician, obviously a play on the word taggart, but taken to an Italian situation in this latest mystery. Tagatino kind of sends the audience messages to give them hints and tips, and also to keep them to the timings of going on and help our actors also know how long they've got in a room. So there's a broadcast function on Zoom. So we've like wormed our way into like lots of the different aspects. So they do their 5 interviews, then they skip on to a middle scene where we round up the facts, we do a poll, and then we do kind of adjust more facts. And the poll really works because people get invested. They see if they're with the majority or in the minority, and they start kind of engaging in making that decision. Then they move back in for the second half, and they do kind of 4-minute interviews, and which kind of adds to the sense of tension because time is running out, things are moving tightly, and we try and plot each room so that there's a big reveal somewhere before the first act, and then we've got kind of like the shaping of the plot so that there's always big information dropping, and it feels like people just need to keep going. And then we have a big scene at the end where everyone's together and votes. You can see all the actors together, and they feel like they're in the same space as you kind of get the classic reveal scene. And no matter who the audience end up voting for, whether they get it right or wrong, it always kind of creates the situation that will reveal the murderer, however that unfolds. We have one of our actors multi-rolling, so that scene is always quite tough as well, because we have to like switch our actor from their kind of like introduction character to their suspect in that time. So there's also kind of a bit of like rejigging and reorganizing going on behind the scenes in that one, which I think amuses a lot of the audience because they love to watch actors multi-role. This show's also helped us think a lot about access. No matter kind of all the stuff that I mentioned about digital theatre, through Zoom there is also, we found that there's a lot of, it's very easy for us to make it accessible for people with a visual impairment, as long as they kind of have some technological kind of, as long as they're able to use a speaking computer and they're used to using that, it's very simple for the show to become accessible for people that are visually impaired, and doesn't take a huge amount of work on our part to like do that. It's just kind of a switch in the way that the actors are working, which is really nice. And then we found, but with BSL and captioning, we found it's a little bit more complicated. It naturally needs the show to kind of like move at a slightly different pace. So we're at the moment moving towards trying to tell and kind of create these relaxed performances that are a bit longer, that leave space for that. And it's been really interesting kind of looking at these new ways that we can kind of explore having BSL and captioning and making the show accessible in different ways. In terms of our process of making the show, it's been similar to doing a theatre show, except we are generally always working on Zoom. So it still takes us a couple of weeks to make the show, and a lot of time in advance writing the storyline. It also, we just introduced the tech way earlier because it's really important that actors working from their own house are comfortable with sorting that out. The way that we've done our Zoom show, the fact that Zoom exists has made our show able to run on a kind of a budget. Obviously, when you're working in tech, it kind of like, it lumps up your budget massively, but to be able to rent your theatre for $15.99 a month is kind of amazing. And it allowed us to spend the money where we needed to spend it, which was like marketing and reaching new audiences, because we were just reaching a whole new audience that we weren't necessarily already talking to. But we have realised, I got really ambitious and I really wanted to like up the level of ambitiousness per show. But because of the fact that we're working in people's homes, because of the fact that we are using other people's, using our actors' laptops a lot of the time, because we can't afford to buy lots of laptops for this at the moment, it means that we are working within certain boundaries. And it definitely feels like Zoom theatre has made it, it's been a perfect playing place for us as a company to kind of like expand and explore this medium, and also to try out how we like change the show for an international audience. Like when we've got people coming in from abroad, like, or we've been booked by a company who's based in Norway, you just have to almost change some of the way that the jokes fall. And like rely on different things just with an awareness of your audience and what kind of their understanding of history is compared to ours. So that's been really interesting as well. I have really enjoyed, I also wanted to do a big shout out for Upstart Theatre, who also did an amazing digital theatre show through the pandemic called Jury Games. And they've been running some amazing kind of digital theatre gaming workshop that I just wanted to say have been absolutely brilliant in helping me reflect on this show and this process, because I'm really enjoying it, and how else we can kind of like use Zoom or build something new, which is obviously a huge output in money. So it's kind of exploring these different areas and working out where Sharp Teeth can go next with their show. We're really interested in creating an interactive musical. We're really interested in like what can be our next online theatre production, what will bring people online. I suspect, and meeting people come from remote Scotland, we had huge groups of people kind of like come from all over the place that wouldn't have been able to see the show. I, as part of the chronic illness community, I want this work to continue so that I can still see stuff, because I'm still effectively, you know, having to spend a lot of time shielding and not often being able to go back into kind of my usual context as a theatre director. So I'm really keen in this work continuing, and I'm really excited about, been running lots of courses at different places to try ideas about where digital theatre can keep exploring and we need to kind of start thinking about like what are the different access points we can use, where can people experiment, where information can be shared to kind of help people, not just the big companies like the RSC and Secret Cinema, who are doing Ghostbusters at the moment, which is a really exciting kind of like piece of online theatre. Like how can smaller companies also have access to kind of like experiment? That's it. That's all I've got to say. Yeah, I think, Luke, were we going to do some questions at the end? Sorry,
I think, yeah, definitely. Thank you, Steph. What journey you've been on, like in a world where I think congratulations, 30,000 viewers across the world is nothing to be sniffed at. So well done. The first question we've got, I think you started to touch on it just as you were wrapping up there, comes from Jonestown. It says, they're really interested to hear your take on the future of this work as our collective relationship to Zoom continues to change. And maybe to just kind of add on that, like, what do you want the future to look like?
Well, we're doing a residency with Brighton University next year with lots of green screen technology to start exploring how we can escape from this box, like this close-up box, which I'm really excited about exploring through that and trying to find new ways. I also think that there are a couple of companies that are also like using the back end of Zoom, because there is a way to get into the back end of Zoom and build your own version of what you want Zoom to look like, which is something that I think will come up. But I'm hoping that there will be other kind of like similar technologies that might start to appear that will be as financially accessible. I think it's hoping, or I've never actually heard it said out loud, but there's some other kind of like spaces to kind of create that. And I know Secret Cinema's new show has been really interesting in that it's mixing film with kind of interactive moments. It's got like game elements, and it's also got like task-based from your house elements are really fun. And that is definitely, I feel like the interactive element of that is going to be a really ways to get reluctant audiences into playing with this. So I feel like our show's been really good because it's brought loads of people who just didn't know, aren't technologically driven in, come out, because it's just about making sure that audiences feel meaningfully connected to the work in the way that it's happening, even if they are zooming in from somewhere far away, basically. I hope that's answered the question.
And do you think, yeah, it's great. I think a couple of follow-up questions. Do you think that the kind of interest in this kind of performance will continue in the years to come? Do you think like there is a chance that Zoom itself, the sheen will wear off at some point? I'm interested because you mentioned that like some people are still reluctant, and I think there's the other end of the scale of people who are just like, I mean, we're on one right now, for example. There's quite a lot of Zoom in our lives. Is there too much?
Yeah, I mean, as someone who definitely gets fatigued from like too much screen time, as most people feel, like I can definitely I feel like the idea sometimes of getting onto a Zoom can feel harder than what our shows feel like. I think as an extrovert, throughout the pandemic, I really relied on Zoom to get my kind of like people energy, and I think our show has found a way yourself and what you need to say, and kind of like really, yeah, it can be really exhausting. I suspect we have found a little bit slower this time at the moment, just because of where we are in the pandemic. Everyone's able to go out, which is great. Not everyone's able to go out, but a lot of people are able to go out. So we've definitely found that our audience are more reluctant to join us at the moment. We've definitely got a slower take up of interest, and we found that the way we're having to talk to audiences having to change to bring people in. Though unfortunately, obviously, with the announcements, those things may change, which is obviously not something we want. But yeah, I think there will be a lag after the pandemic of people trying to go back. But I think that this kind of communication is inherently now in our lives. Like, people have moved out of cities, people are changing countries and working from abroad, companies are working across borders. Like, we definitely had a huge amount of interest from like schools and that work online, and they want to bring people together in different ways. We've had a huge amount of interest from companies. So I would ideally like to be able to keep it in the public sphere rather than being in a kind of more corporate world. But there's definitely like that interest is there, and it will leak out into the public world. And I think that once we find our audience who still want to do it, and as long as people know that they can attend in groups, like, it's not a loner task, this one. It's not something that you attend on your own. You can come together in a group in your house of like group of 1 to 3 and attend the show. So it still feels like a social thing, and it doesn't feel quite be visible to strangers for a little while. So I think it is inherently going to be part of our world. It's just us developing the language and the understanding to kind of feel, to working out how it's going to be. And Coney are working on a really exciting case study at the moment, which we're part of, which is looking at how we market this work to audiences. And they've got groups of reluctant and keen audiences, and kind of like looking at how we can bring both those audiences into watching digital theatre work in the future, basically.
Interesting. Well, I would be very keen to hear the outcomes of those case studies. 2 more questions on audiences, one from Twitter and then one from the chat. What do you think of hybrid events?
I think they're great, as long as they don't make the people online or the people in person feel secondary, and that's a really complex balance. I think there's definitely ways, if people can find, I think the problem is finding the right people that have the right skills to be able to set up a system that will work, to test it out and put resources in. And often places that are funded rather than kind of more corporate places don't have the money for that. So it's about making sure that companies know that it won't be a quick and easy way of finding ways to make a hybrid event. It's kind of playing around and messing with it. But I think if you do one, it's always just, I mean, I've worked on shows where you've made a show for a visually impaired audience member and also a sighted audience member, and you are trying to make sure that they both have, one is not just an audio described experience, they are both like valid experiences. And that's kind of the same for like hybrid event, really, is making sure that they're both kind of like valid, exciting experiences that are supported and held and don't feel secondary, which is I think is really important, because some people find being online really hard, and some people find can't attend in person.
Thank you. Okay, one last question then, if I may, Steph. How do you balance the desire to do more, to do more complex and interesting things with the need to serve an audience of varied technical abilities?
That is really hard. I think it's just had to be slow and steady. Like, it's almost like we're learning, but also our audience is learning. And the more, like, you know, last year when we were doing our first one, we had loads of people who were we brought in a kind of older audience for some of the shows, and we noticed a real stark difference between our older audiences and our younger audiences. Our older audiences didn't always know when they were muted, and had trouble kind of changing their names, which is something that we allow people to change their Zoom names so that we can put them with their teammates, and that was something that we needed to give people a lot of support with. But we found that younger audiences, they just know automatically. So it was kind of about always making sure that we had support on hand to make sure that people knew how to do that, basically, because people just have varying abilities. And my mum, you can tell her things about computers repeatedly. It's like whenever she looks at a computer, you can see the stress go into her face. And so we've always tried to make sure that we're looking at that. And Zoom is a really easy format for that, because people, they just, there's a lot of people with that knowledge. So they can ring someone that they know and be like, how do I do this? Whereas when you're working with something that's more specific, it can be so much harder to so it's always about just making it feel like a swan while you're the swan's legs going underneath to make it run as smoothly as possible.
That is a wonderful analogy and a great place to finish up. Thank you, Steph. Massive thank you for making time to talk to us about that. You will find all the details on Sharp Teeth Theatre on the events page for this YouTube, the text below here, or on our website if you want to find out more about Stephanie's work and the work of Sharp Teeth Theatre. Before you all leave us, next week's talk is our last one of the year, and in this talk, studio resident Team Beck will share ideas on the importance of visual invitation to social interaction, and we'll explore how play encourages audiences to move from looking into participation.